Hello. Hello. It says I was on a different tab. I didn't see.
And
it says you've been live for 20 seconds.
We're not technically Aucademy. We're Aucademy and Neurodive.
Yes.
So I didn't use the Aucademy intro just so we didn't completely confuse people. Sure I'll make a banner actually. So if people, hello everybody. If you want to comment, so hold on. If you want to comment, head to Aucademy comments and we'll see them. Otherwise, I don't think Sam will see them.
No, and I've just realised I've shared it to the. I spent, you know, the 30-second countdown that you do.
Yeah.
It just built the pressure, and I started fumbling the keys, and I couldn't get the Academy thing in time. And then I shared it to my own Facebook page and not my Neurodive one. And now I'm just looking at pictures of myself on my Facebook. So I'm just gonna pretend this is not happening. We haven't really started yet. Go back to share to. Why can't I share to a page?
Okay, let me find it. Hold on. I can share.
Sorry, this is not a good
Hello,
start.
anyone.
Yeah, we're all live.
Somebody's laughing.
Just that's what people just come on this.
I know you're not expected to like be doing anything or working or anything, but would you mind sharing this to Sam's page because he's got a little bit confused?
Can he do that? Probably
well, can share it.
What to my page?
Yeah, he can't cross post it necessarily.
Ah, awesome. Si, is he there? I can't see I can't see any of the comments.
Oh, can you not see the comment section? Yeah.
No, they can. Right, yeah. Goodness me. It's like waking up.
I love it.
Caveman has been frozen for years.
Kelly is like, I don't know what a parsnip head therapist is. I'm intrigued.
Right. Do you want to take this one or?
Well, it was your suggestion. I mean,
yeah,
I love the parsnip head thing. Yeah, so this is the title.
So let's do, because I'm the promoter, aren't I? I'm like the dodgy boxing promoter. I always end up, that's my thing. I'm very good at selling myself and others as well. Now, this Friday, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to once again have the privilege of doing a co-webinar with the wonderful Chloe. I'm going to point that way, but it's StreamYard, so it's that way, but it might not be on your screen, but she's over there. She's not over there. That's my sofa. She's on next to me. And the title is Supporting Mental Health in Autistic Children and Young People. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to join up with Chloe to deliver something in that area is that she has a wealth of experience in that area, particularly an autistic experience of mental health and well-being and therapies that have been used to try and support autistic people. My background is probably more trying to deliver those therapies a lot of the time. And I thought a fun subject today would be if I shared some of the errors I think I've made. And by the way, I wouldn't necessarily have known they were errors until maybe 5 years ago, 2 years ago, working with Chloe and listening to her talk about certain things that have changed my perspective. So I thought we'd go back and call the old Sam a parsnip head, and then we can talk about what the new Sam might do differently, because that's important.
And the parsnip head in general is just this lovely thing that I can't even think exactly why it came about. But you were kind of self-deprecating and calling yourself like, I can't remember. And I was like, shall we just use the word parsnip as opposed to anything really insulting?
And then naughty words.
And then you did a drawing of a parsnip, and that really amused me. It was amazing. Had twangly feet and everything. Yeah, I quite like this though, Sam, because you asked the questions. Like, I think it works quite well, because obviously I can just talk at people with my slides.
Yeah, but my question, what I can do is I can say, here's what I did. What's the problem with that, Chloe?
Okay.
So
have you got ideas then?
Par example, I've got examples. I've got things that I did do. Now I'm just sharing.
Okay.
Finally, I've figured out how to do it on my own page. I'm a genius. Aucademy. I might have spelled Academy wrong. No. With Chloe.
And then we've got Si here. Si does like to put his lovely comments into you, doesn't he, Sam?
I
So
love
this Halloween, Sam will be dressing as a Hulk-inspired parsnip, and I will be a sausage-inspired potato.
Like it. Like it. I think I have to say, Hulk-inspired parsnip, that's not the most odd and, well, maybe not insulting, but thing I've been called this weekend. I played in a rugby match at the weekend, an over 35s game. That's how old I am. And I was referred to as a budget Jason Momoa. Now, I have to say that is the nicest thing I think I've ever been called. But they then went on to say, you know, like when you order something off Wish. I don't know if you've ordered anything off Wish, but it doesn't turn out.
And then it comes and it's like nothing like... Oh, Si, was that actually your question today, or was that Ben's, which was, do penguins have legs or just feet? And then they were looking into it. It was amazing.
God, I mean, if they've got legs, they don't use them. They don't deserve them. They need to give them back to someone. They're not making full use of them. Right. So, exemplar one, and that's example in French. For anyone who doesn't speak French, exemplar. I don't know. That might not be true, but bear with me. So, example one was, I was in a session once with a young lady who parents had wanted her to come and talk to me about some of her difficult past that she could remember. She was still quite young at the time, probably 9, 10, maybe 11. And she was being really open and honest about stuff, which was great. We talked about other things as well, but towards the end of the session, she spoke about something that was quite a difficult time, and I could see she was almost experiencing that, you know, really vividly when she was talking about it. And then the session ended and I sent her home, and she really struggled in the car, and parents fortunately told me about that. And I mean, I did, you know, my take from that was that I always had to end sessions on, you know, with a positive feeling, which I think just therapeutically is better anyway. But there's also been a couple of other occasions where I've almost, I don't think I've appreciated how difficult it is for certain autistic people to talk about the memory of a situation, if that makes sense. Because neurotypically, it's kind of, oh, talking makes it better. Talking makes it better. But I worked with one chap in particular who was talking about, he couldn't talk about it because it was like it was happening again. And I don't know if that's something that you could speak to or add some weight to, or
there's like a number of things there, and to be clear,
well, there would be.
Yeah, I mean, in case you don't know me, although I am a doctor, Chloe Farrahart, I'm not a therapist, so I'm not that kind of doctor. So my doctorate was in how do we reduce mental health stigma specifically, so acquired neurodivergence, with a script about neurodiversity. So I'm very interested in mental health and depathologization, and I do a lot on, like we're going to do on Friday, what works and what does not work in therapy for autistic people who do have mental health issues. So I just want to caveat, I'm not a therapist. So I guess, what's the key things to come out of what you just said? Can you summarize what the key question might be?
Okay, so therapeutically, there's almost there is a perhaps neurotypical perception that talking about a difficult situation in the past could be helpful. My guess is that for some particularly autistic people, it could actually be a really traumatic experience just to talk about the situation, potentially. That could be wrong.
Yeah, so from my non-therapist perspective and just the autistic perspective, I guess, and in terms of the lots of people that I consult with and things like that, yeah, like I say, there's a number of things there. It might be that because we process quite differently a lot of the time, so we process feelings, we process the situation that we might have been through potentially quite differently to non-autistic people. For instance, I've also consulted with people who have, by neurotypical and therapist and literature definitions, experienced trauma, i.e., and I'm not going to go into detail here. So while there is content warning of mention of abuse and things, we're not going to go into any real detail. They had experienced forms of abuse that by anyone's standard neurotypical standards would be classed as traumatic. They didn't feel it was traumatic. They'd processed it. They'd worked through it. What they found traumatic is things that non-autistic people wouldn't consider to be traumatic. So that constant invalidation trauma, being told it's not that loud in here. Those, I mean, that's a really basic understanding of validation trauma, but being constantly told or reminded that your experience of the world is wrong, in quotation marks. So this is the difference between different types of trauma, and actually some work that I've just got a postdoc position to start work on, a much bigger project, and I'm like a little tiny strand of it. But it's actually, from my perspective, I'm going to be looking at the link between adverse childhood experiences, so what's classed as ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, being neurodivergent, and mental health. And the issue that we have when it comes to trauma is ACEs, so again, adverse childhood experiences, would be around things that we would typically class as traumatic, negligence, abuse, and so on and so forth. That, if you like, is almost like a major, if you want to think of them as a big trauma that squashed you. When we're talking about autistic trauma, for instance, invalidation trauma, that's like little pinpricks for years, maybe, for most of your lifetime, maybe decades of your life. So there's differences there in how we might experience trauma. So it does become quite difficult to process trauma sometimes for autistic people. That's not necessarily giving you an answer for your scenario.
No, but it's lots of ideas. And it makes me think of another parsnip-headed moment where, and I think this is, I mean, this is not necessarily, I guess, me. It's just things that I've heard of in practice. So almost a social intervention type approach might take the autistic child that's had difficulty with something socially and try and give them the other person's perspective, because they can't empathize or see the other person's perspective, so we can help by doing that. But what you might actually be doing there inadvertently is actually invalidating their experience and saying, well, no, it's actually this. And that's kind of what you're talking about with that pinprick.
And you see it so often. I went to, it was like a teachers meeting around my niece being bullied a few years back. And she was being bullied. She was being socially ostracized by the other pupils. She would have been about 8, I think, at the time, 7 or 8. And yeah, going in and listening to the deputy head. And when my niece described the bullying, the deputy head said, "Oh, well, I'm sure that's not what those pupils, those girls were doing. I'm sure it wasn't bullying. You've just probably misunderstood." That's incredibly invalidating. It doesn't matter how others perceive it. If that individual has been harmed by the situation, it is invalidating. Then tell them that, no, you're wrong. It's gaslighting as well. It's, what makes us end up feeling like we are very broken a lot of the time, because we're being compared and gaslit for our experiences. So that Kelly, without me having to, so it's almost like, if you ever watched anything with Kieran Rose, he sometimes make a joke about how many minutes in, like he has a bet with a friend, how many minutes into a talk before he starts talking about masking. Kelly's helped me here. How many minutes in before I get to talk about hyperphantasia and aphantasia? So this is one of the, I say it nearly every session now, one of the biggest things that I think it's one of the most important things to recognise about the autistic person in front of you. So if you're having a therapy session with an autistic person, if you're educating them, if you're just having a chat with them, working out if they think in pictures or not, really will start to help you work out how to communicate with them. So what Kelly's saying here, so for those who aren't particularly aware, hyperphantasia is incredibly vivid mental imagery without having to close your eyes, which is how I experience the world. So I'm constantly thinking in pictures very vividly. It can also include other senses as well. So you can also feel things while you're imagining and talking and so on. So Kelly's saying here, I'm hyperphantasic, with all thoughts and replay will happen to simply talk or do talk therapy about traumatic events. So it's doubly traumatic. they've only found that DBT, so dialectical behavioural therapy, skills-based therapies have been helpful. And I've spoken about this before as well. So I can't remember if I spoke to you about this as well, which is, so EMDR, so eye movement desensitization, EMDR, I can never remember what it sounds like. Reprogram, I can't remember.
Reprogramming,
yeah, something like that. And that is based on mental imagery. So if you've got somebody who doesn't think in pictures, then they can't do it. If you've got somebody who's a hyperfant, so a number of us in the autistic community are always of an extreme. So you have aphants who can't think in pictures at all to a much greater extent than you can than you see in the non-autistic community, and you have hyperfants within the autistic community who vividly think in pictures. So if you somebody who doesn't think in pictures, they can't do imagination-based techniques. And if you're a hyperfant, it's like reliving the trauma. It's like you're literally in that traumatic, whatever it is that you're reliving. So there's a difficulty there. If we come back to your original example, what were you saying about when they left and then they were distressed when they went home? What was the key thing you'd like to?
Well, I think again, it was just, and again, this might not be a particularly, this would be probably a good therapeutic practice anyway. But I guess the importance of understanding how to make that person feel more comfortable before they leave. And I guess to example that, and it's something I think I always knew just from work and experience and the things I had kind of looked at early on, but speaking more to you and being more involved in the autistic community online over the last couple of years has really helped amplify it. But now I had a session the other day with a similar situation where some tough stuff came out, and I just automatically, towards the last sort of 10-15 minutes of the session, we got back onto special interests and we talked about those, because again, it was and I'm always open and honest with the person I'm talking to, because actually I don't want them to feel like I'm manipulating their feelings, but I'll always say, right, we'll finish by talking about something a bit more interesting, and I guess for me, I just, the parsnip headedness, if we would summarize that, would be a couple of things. Assuming that just talking about it and offloading it is going to make someone feel better. But also, I think you've highlighted another parsnip headedness that I've definitely done in the past that I was going to come on to, where I had a young chap where I had a really good session doing everything through game and play and activity. And the next day I had a 14-year-old come in, and I tried to do the same. And quite rightly, as a 14-year-old, he was like, what the fuck is this? And basically walked out. So again, it's that idea that, you can't, I don't think you can generate an autistic approach to therapy.
Yeah, one size definitely doesn't fit all.
Yeah, it doesn't fit all. So sorry, that's a bit of a roundabout way of saying that. But to be fair, Simon's been putting me off with his comments. So first of all,
you can just go to the private chat if you want to ignore the comment section. I
definitely could eat 17 lemons in one sitting, but I like the gag better, that I might need some lemonade to do so. That works on a lot of levels. And also, he's worried he's not got control of the banners, Chloe. Now, I was thinking you should then pin that comment to the banner just to upset him further. But, that's a bit naughty of me, maybe.
But no, I've actually linked the webinar Eventbrite in the comment section.
Idea. That's a good idea.
But, from what you said, that sounds like good, that you've updated and got good practice now. So actually, yes, ending the session with a good in-depth for like 10 minutes discussion on their dedicated interest to pull them out of the difficult things they may have been thinking or talking about, and giving them something safe to focus their monotropic mind, so their narrow thinking. It's not narrow thinking, that's not quite the right word, sorry, but our focused attention into something like our dedicated interest, I think that's
dedicated.
Dedicated. That's fine, it's fine.
Dead special, didn't I?
specialization, dedicated interest.
We're just pulling the parsnips out one at a time. I can't just.
But that sounds like good practice to me, and it's a number of
I'm
things.
not a parsnip head anymore. I've changed. I was a parsnip head.
Well, yeah, we need another vegetable. So the other thing, so you're asking about, you know, talking therapy is always at the moment the go-to if the person, if the individual or the services feel that that person has the capacity to engage in a talking therapy. Now, that's not to say that actually the talking therapy or talking is going to be the best thing just because you can talk. So I do certainly think that, particularly again, if you do think very vividly in pictures, and it is quite traumatic to talk through and start to imagine those very difficult situations or scenarios that you've experienced. Other methods of working through difficult thoughts and feelings, art therapy, play therapy, music therapy, as long as it's obviously adapted for autistic experience, I think can actually be quite powerful above that of talking. So I've spoken before about how, for instance, I get very frustrated with certain counselling techniques. So like the Rogerian method, where they just repeat back to you what you just said. As an autistic person, that is beyond annoying and frustrating. I know exactly what I just said because I said it.
I mean, that's quite annoying anyway, I think, but just in
general. It is. But it's meant to help that person come to their own realizations, etc. It's kind of like, yeah, but as an autistic person, if I could do that, I wouldn't be here. I need the insight. I need you to tell me the things that maybe I'm experiencing that I can't recognize. So there's certainly an element of that as well, and focusing more on the concrete. So when you said like talking through some of the more traumatic things, it can be difficult. A number of us as autistic people, we tend to try, or it just happens naturally, to almost separate when we're talking about trauma from the emotions.
Okay.
I don't know if that's common across everybody. I'm not sure. So there's a lot of discussion, like say with this postdoc that I'm going to be starting, around narrative exposure therapy, which the exposure bit always concerns me. But when I looked into it, there's not much on whether it works with autistic people, so it will be interesting to look into that. But it's about building the narrative with the person so that you're not just focusing on, say, one context or one situation. You're not just focusing, like some therapies might focus on just the here and now. Some therapies might just focus on this idea that you have a mental disorder and ignoring actually the history of that person's life. So it's about storytelling, I guess.
That's interesting. So the one, you know, I would consider the work I try and do therapeutic, but I'm not a trained therapist in anything in particular, so I don't call myself a therapist as such. But the one thing that I did go away and get training in was something called narrative therapy, and I love it. And the part of the reason I do love it is because it's all about trying to explore everybody's story. So if you come in, someone will tell me they're autistic and I'll take some information from that. But when they're telling me, I don't know, they got emotionally overwhelmed when they walked into a new setting or scenario, I'm still going to ask why. I'm not going to go, oh, well, they're autistic, so that's probably because X, Y, and Z. It's all about exploring that story for them. And then you relate that and tie it into themes in their lives and what their beliefs are. And then you use that narrative that they have about themselves to try and create a slightly more positive belief system, I guess.
And I think, it's basically contextualizing things as well with that narrative. So, like I say, you're not just talking about the trauma. You're actually, I think it's going to be interesting to look into it more. Like I say, with the project that we're going to be starting. Because
is that about narrative therapy then, or is that slightly different?
It's such a huge project that I couldn't actually outline the whole project. The main aim, if you like, of the project is actually to look at the link between and come up with work and intervention. When I say interventions, we hate that word usually, but basically support methods for young people. So the link between ACEs, so childhood experiences of trauma, and mental health. Like I say, that's the broad understanding of this project, but it's across several universities. It's well funded and it's a 4-year project. I'm a very narrow part of another smaller work stream for this bigger project. Does that make sense? So yeah, we're looking at
hang on, you're a narrow part of a smaller work stream.
Yep.
You're a narrow bit of a small stream.
It's a smaller part of a smaller part of, so it's like this massive project with so many people on it
drifting along the stream, tiny stream,
basically.
Okay.
But there's me and Annette. So me and Annette are there in our capacity, our knowledge about neurodiversity and neurodivergence and things. And it was interesting because as part of the funding application, the funders came back, because they don't necessarily know about neurodivergence. They probably don't necessarily know about mental health, because funders don't always know the inside and outs of the disciplines that are applying for funding. But they couldn't see the link between neurodivergence, childhood trauma, and mental health. And I was like, they're intrinsically you can't separate them, because mental health is actually acquired neurodivergence. So anxiety, psychosis, they're acquired once you've had some life experience of some description. And then you've got innate neurodivergence and then trauma. So yeah, they couldn't see until I outlined it quite clearly, you can't separate those things. You can't talk about mental health without talking about neurodivergence. You can't talk about neurodivergence and mental health without talking about trauma. So it's going to be interesting. So I want to see how the narrative exposure therapy, for instance, will, I think it'll be useful. I think it will need adapting though, because largely it's been used with non-autistic people. So it might be what I class as straightforward things in quotation marks, which is that sessions will need to be longer. We take longer to process information because we're processing far more information than a non-autistic person. We did a recording today that's going to be released on the 6th for Aucademy. So with an update from Rachel Cullen on their communication hypothesis. And that is such a key thing for therapists to understand. It's actually a key thing for loads of areas, education, employment, like everywhere. But from my perspective, therapists need to understand it, because what Rachel is demonstrating and starting to demonstrate empirically is that, so their example is, we always talk about as autistic people why we hate the phrase, "How are you doing?" Right?
Yeah, especially if you say it, "How are you doing?" That's just creepy.
But at least that's got context. I know where that's come from. Whereas "How are you doing?" or "How are you doing today?" What Rachel talks about and demonstrates from their linguistics background is non-autistic people will process that whole sentence in one chunk. How are you doing? And they just give you the bullet points and the social. It's a social thing. It's a social communication device. If you're asking an autistic person, and this literally happens for me, and when she described it, I said that's so validating to see it explained, because that's exactly what my brain does. So when I hear "hello, how are you doing?" it's not one chunk that's being processed. I'm processing the hello. Right, you're saying hello to me. Who are you? In what context? What's going on right now? That's a social greeting, etc., etc. What time of day is it? How? Okay, I now have to process the word how. Right, what does that mean in this context, in what I'm being asked? And how are you doing? And if it's today, do they mean since 9 a.m. this morning? Do they mean, and it's so much more information that we're processing. Rachel obviously explains it far better than I do.
So it kind of sounds like you're almost breaking down each individual aspect of the phrase, but the phrase itself, when broken down, is too ambiguous. There's no,
that's not the issue. You can, that's the issue. That's why if there was specificity. So again,
I can't even say that word, specificity.
I know it's taken me a long time to learn how to say that word, because I have to use it so often, and I couldn't say it for a while. So I'm really stepping on the session that we did with Rachel, and they do explain it so much better than I do. Oh no, what did you just say? You just said it's almost like
breaking it down into chunks, but actually as a whole, it's too general anyway. There's no specificity.
Specificity. Yeah, thank you. Specificity. Yep.
Yeah, you can.
What they did in their master's dissertation, so they're going to start their PhD next year. So what they did in their master's dissertation is they gave what looks like to non-autistic neurotypical people the same sentence over and over and over again, but they changed key words. So it was person A had a spoon. Person B is thinking of a spoon. Who can touch the spoon? It's a really weird phrase anyway, but it's used to demonstrate by our favourite person, Simon Baron-Cohen. That's a joke, by the way. Sarcasm. Autistic people know sarcasm. Used as a demonstration that we don't have theory of mind because we can't answer the question particularly well. Now, the reason we don't is because we're concentrating far too many factors in that massive sentence. It is a massive sentence to us. It doesn't necessarily appear to other people as if it is. So, for instance, where it says person A had a spoon,
past tense.
They had it. They had it. Where's the spoon now? Have they still got it? Right. So we're asking, our brains are doing this very quickly, but it's obviously more information. Rachel then changed the sentence up to 12 times. So it was still roughly the same sentence by changing it to person A has a spoon and things like this, right? The non-autistic people all kept giving the same answer and even commented on, why do you keep showing me the same sentence? The autistic people didn't. They gave different answers dependent on those different changes of like had versus have versus has a spoon and so on and so forth. Because we are processing at the word level according to Rachel's hypothesis. And what's really important is Rachel wants to go on to hopefully potentially demonstrate and investigate, do autistic people who maybe have a language impairment or maybe have higher support needs, are they processing information at the phoneme level? So that's the sound within each word, which would be even more information.
You're not, Chloe, you can't be suggesting that Simon Baron-Cohen was wrong as buggery. Was he wrong as buggery? It sounds like he was.
He really was. So Rachel is demonstrating that we can answer those questions if we are given clear instructions. And this is where people, non-autistic people, when I do training and I say, you know, what do you think you know about autistic people? Let's have that conversation kind of thing. And you get, you know, you have to be literal because they need you to be literal. They don't know what that means. They think they do, but we need absolute clarity. So when somebody asks me, how are you doing today? That's awful. That's a ridiculous question. So when I have consults with people on a weekly basis, for instance, so I see them once a week, I don't ask, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Those are way too difficult, too ambiguous. And there's multiple issues there with alexithymia, so not being able to recognize your emotions and so on. So I ask, what happened to you this week? And I don't expect them to give me the bullet points or the most important points. What I expect and know I will receive is in chronological order what happened to them. Because they don't know, and I'm the same, which bit is the most important. You need to know all of it to get to the bit that might be really important in this discussion. So it's that specificity of what happened to you this week. And that gives them a time frame. It's about action, not feelings, things like this. I have no idea if we've answered anything to do with what you were asking.
I probably, but you know, even if we didn't, the journey was worth it. So just a reminder for anyone that's watching, we're going to be doing this and lots more in more depth and more detail on Friday. And there's the little link, as if by magic. Is that you, Simon? No, because you're not in charge of the banners, are you?
It's me.
You are in charge of what question did he ask?
I can't pronounce this either. It's one of the longest words in the dictionary, and I can't pronounce it either.
That's easy. Flockinacci hilifloppification. Definitely that. Definitely that. And
I can't remember what it means.
if you think I haven't got it correctly, that could just be a processing issue between us, potentially.
Yes.
That's it, because communication, I was thinking about theory of mind when you were talking then, and it's like, well, the assumption with theory of mind is that when the theory of the other person's mind doesn't get translated, the fault is of the person receiving. But communication is two-way. So if you're not sending the theory of mind in a way that's accessible to that other person, potentially because of their difference in processing either the verbal information or the sensory information. So like, again, with non-verbal communication, if you have someone who finds it hard to even focus on faces or focus on all the bits moving at once, and you assume they then can't read non-verbal instructions, or they've got a lack of theory of mind. But if the parts of the face were maybe broken down or didn't move around so much, or the person wasn't talking and moving their hands around like I'm doing, they might be able to read those cues really well. So
it's so frustrating and ambiguous, and lots of non-autistic people aren't good at that stuff either. Whereas at least with autistic people, you get very straightforward. I feel like this, I'm thinking this, or I don't know what I'm thinking, I don't know what I'm feeling. And those are very valid responses, but a lot of non-autistic people don't think of them as valid. Well, you must know what you're feeling. Well, no, saying I don't know is incredibly valid. That is what they are experiencing.
That's definitely a parsnip head mistake I've made, because the assumption is when someone says they don't know, they're not telling you. So you've got to build more trust. But actually, you're right. It might just be they actually don't know. So,
and with autistic people, you start to get an understanding of the person, particularly if you consult with them or support them on a semi or even regular basis, about whether they are likely to hide something from you. So then when they do say, I don't know, you can be quite confident that they are being honest, that they don't know. I mean, in those instances, that's about building that individual self-advocacy. So I tend to help autistic people who do get frustrated with family members or therapists who will badger them when they say, I don't know, like you say, because they feel like we're hiding something. So what we did instead was build into their sort of script, their, to script to say, I'm still processing how I feel about that. Because at least there's nothing that person can do about that. That person's processing. You can't speed that up. You can't, anything. And like I say, for me, I don't know is a perfectly valid expression. And I think it's about as well. So like you said, so there is too much focus on talking. And I think I know largely for a number of therapists, not all, but it's as if autistic people, we don't give off those cues. We don't give off those facial cues that will demonstrate how we're thinking and feeling. But actually, we have lots of other ways that we are demonstrating how we're thinking and feeling. And I spoke about this earlier today, where I get very frustrated. I've been to not a large number, but a very small number of EHCPs. So in the UK, education healthcare plans for disabled pupils who need decent support in schools. Not to say they necessarily get it, though. And I've been there as an autistic consultant in advocacy capacity. And I get frustrated when I see things like so-and-so pupil, their need is to learn how to express and explain their emotions, because at the moment they're throwing chairs, melting down, etc., etc. What they mean is we want them to be able to calmly and nicely sit down as a child and orally, verbally tell them about abstract emotions. I feel sad, and this is why. I feel angry, and this is why. That is expecting far too much of a distressed autistic child in school. And quite frankly, they were already expressing their emotions and demonstrating how they're feeling. If they are throwing a chair across the room, they are telling you. If they are having a meltdown, one, we don't want it to get to that point, but they are demonstrating it. And I think there's far too much focus on talking. Chloe says, doing lots of talking. But yeah, there's far too much focus on talking, whereas a bit of silence, a bit of stimming, watching that other person's stims and seeing what those stims might mean for that individual.
But the thing is, the point of sharing emotion, I think, in terms of just in general, in terms of a useful regulation tool, the only reason that expressing emotion verbally so someone else can understand it would be useful is if they react accordingly. If the autistic child is told to express their anger because, I don't know, someone has moved the chair they usually sit on and they say, that makes me angry. Yes, but you can't always have the same chair. So straight away, that expression has now become pointless. That doesn't help me regulate anymore. It's, I might as well. I'm not saying it's conscious.
What was the point? Yeah, what was the point in me articulating my upset, my frustration, my thoughts and my feelings around this situation if you're going to invalidate it and not doing it, not do anything about it anyway?
Yeah, it becomes a useless tool, really.
And I can't think where it would have been. So I saw something. I've done a number of meetings today, so I'm kind of forgetting where I've seen everything. But I saw something. So if anybody in the comment section knows where I found this, that was just explaining really straightforward things like a young person or who was autistic. The most simple change really helped them, where they sat them closer to the window in class, and the young person responded that made them feel like they were outside looking in and not stuck in the middle of the room where it's really closing down on them. That sounds like a beautiful, straightforward thing that you could do to really help somebody's well-being. Just move the seat where they need, get them to sit where they need to sit.
And that's where, again, I think the word, like the idea of therapeutic support, of providing therapeutic support to someone, you have to put aside what you think or what your opinion is of what is therapeutic. Because to someone who doesn't, I barely remember where I sit, and if I'm in a room for long enough, I'll probably have sat in most of the seats. So for me, that would not, I couldn't look at someone being upset and think, well, I might be upset because they're in a different. So you have to have that. I was talking about this the other day, but I think, like, with empathy, and we, us neurotypicals, if I'm in that bracket, give ourselves a lot of credit for empathy. But actually, if you look at someone and think, oh, I know how you're feeling because I feel like that about this too, I don't think that is empathy, because that's you assuming.
Projecting,
So actually, real empathy is kind of, I think I know what they're feeling, and I think I might have an idea why, but I don't really know. I don't know that person. I don't know who they are. I don't know. I can find out. I can listen to them, and I can try and connect with it. But actually, true empathy is kind of knowing that you don't know fully, I think. That's what I've been thinking about recently anyway. So Chloe, I'm going to have to head off because apparently my loud monotone voice is keeping Arthur awake upstairs, and it's bedtime. But on Friday I'll be in a different place, so you can perhaps not listen to my loud monotone voice too much, but you can for a little bit then. Everybody get there on Friday. Do it. I don't know how. I've lost my sales pitch now, but just be there on Friday.
Lots of content in the start about things that you need to know if you're going to go into therapy, things if you're a young, an adult of a young person wanting to let the the therapist get an understanding of your autistic young person or your autistic profile. So just because we're autistic doesn't always mean that we recognize that we do or don't think in pictures, or that we experience alexithymia and so on. So there's a number of things that I go through in the session on Friday that will help you build up that profile for yourself or your young person. And then you've got that knowledge, and then you'll go, well, I know that this particular therapy is very imagination based, so that's not really going to help my young person who doesn't think in pictures, and so on. So we're trying to get you to build that. But what I like is, because I'm doing it with Sam, and obviously whoever attends, we can have a nice discussion, actually pick the things apart, as opposed to me just giving you the information. We can get.
I'm going to try and have a bit of a presentation about just some of the adaptations I might think about making if I was perhaps we're not going to look at particular therapy as such, but therapeutic support. What is therapeutic support? And I'll give you a clue. A lot of the time, it's about changing the environment, changing yourself and your interactions, and not trying to change the person in front of you too much.
No, because we are awesome as autistic people.
And I've got to ask, by Broadbean, who's Broadbean? Is that you, do you think? Or I don't really know with Simon anymore, but who he's calling.
No, I think it must be you, that you're a broad bean.
I'm a broad
because
bean.
I'm a potato.
Yeah, you can't be both, can you?
No.
No, but then a broad bean, if we were side by side, head-wise, now this is going to be triggering your visual images, isn't it? But we're side by side head-wise, you wouldn't look like the potato and me the broad bean, because that would be like that, wouldn't it? So it'd be so it could mean you. Sorry, thanks as always. Because you're broad and no parsnip, I've been promoted, maybe.
Well, you still have to be a vegetable of some description. Although beans aren't vegetables, are they?
No, they're legumes.
Is it legumes or legumes? I've always said legumes and it's wrong.
No. I don't know if I've ever said that word out loud. So
okay, I have no idea, because I don't think I've probably only ever read it, and when I've said it out loud, it's legume. But it might. I
honestly don't think I've ever had a use for the word linguine. That's a pasta, isn't it? No, that's linguine. Anyway,
I think it's legume. It's probably legume. Anyway, bye, lovely people.
See you all Friday.